Hello learners, welcome back to this course on Sociology of Media and Communication. Today is lecture 17 and in the previous lecture we had started with the unit 3rd on digital media and this is going to be a follow up to the previous one. So, today we are going to talk about digital media and society, technology, power and participation. So, we will start by talking about the digital media revolution, and as has been spoken of in this particular course, this new revolution has in fact had very profound impacts in comparison to the previous ones, and we are just beginning to register its initial effects. This is also because, like I had underlined in the previous lecture, that the changes are very fast, the intensity and the frequency. So, therefore, to keep up with the changes and to register their effects is also a continuous process. Now, if we think about the introduction of the printing press, it had affected only one stage of cultural communication, which is distribution of media. The photograph, which we had discussed through the semiotic approach, affected only one type of communication, still images. In contrast, the digital media revolution, it affects all stages of communication, be it acquisition, storage, manipulation, distribution, and it also affects all types of media, text, still images, moving images, sound and spatial considerations. So, what we see is an overwhelming revolution in the digital space. Mark Poster was one of the first theorists to provide an insightful discussion on the emerging communications revolution of what would be termed new media. Now, Poster argued that the main difference between old broadcast media and new media is that new media is active, whereas old media is passive. Active because remember from the previous class that we were talking about the interactivity associated with digital media. Poster associated broadcast media with modernity, linking it to the development of modern industrial capitalism and the nation state. This is also something that we had discussed in relation to the evolving public sphere and how it was seen as connected to modern democratic societies, and then development of the printing press with respect to industrial capitalism, and then the growth of the nation state. The structure of broadcast media reflected its role in the modern nation state. A small elite group of producers, due to wealth and privilege, they were able to shape the public sphere, which was also a fundamental critique of the Habermasian idea of the public sphere, and sent one-way communication to a large mass of receivers. So, what we have here is actually this one-way communication or a monological kind of communication. The communication model was hierarchical, where those in power or representing those interests created hegemony through the ownership and distribution of popular culture, which encouraged audience views favorable to the status quo. So, one could also see that if you have ownership of a printing press or a newspaper or a publishing house, you could publish what you felt needed to be published, and this is also connected to the gatekeeping of knowledge and information. This critique of modern media and popular culture is also associated with the Frankfurt School, particularly the scholars whom we had done, Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, who had argued that the broadcast model promotes a passive audience which is vulnerable to herd mentalities, mass culture, and enables nationalism and fascism to thrive. They were also writing in the context of Nazi Germany in terms of how the broadcast media became tools of propaganda in the hands of the fascist state, and therefore, this idea of how mass receivers were given one kind of information, leading to the growth of mass culture as the state deemed appropriate. By contrast, Poster argued that this new internet model promotes a more active and critical subjective. You have interactive, two-way communication in the internet architecture, which collapses the distinction between consumers and producers, and what we have is a decentralized, less hierarchical, network-like model of media production. So, there is a creation of network society. If you go back to Manuel Castell's lecture, you will understand that there is a similarity in the way that the digital media revolution is discussed. This structure gives audiences increased choice and also the ability to answer back or produce their own media. So, this decentralization and producers become consumers and senders become receivers, which disrupt the logic of the old media or first media age. So, there is a disruption in that. Poster links decentralization and two-way communication to a more active, engaged and aware audience, which must make their choices, decisions and form opinions from a wide range of available information sources. There is a democratization also of the public sphere. Now, in the digital age, media becomes a lean forward rather than a lean back medium, and Poster links this more critical thinking, actively engaged subject with the context of multiple and diffuse identity formation, which is associated with postmodernism, where electronic culture promotes unstable identities in continuous processes of multiple identity formations. You also have in the digital age multiple identity formations, where there is a possibility of democratization of knowledge, engagement with media content and the diversified public sphere. Now, the first ways in which digital media is novel compared to this earlier media paradigms such as the broadcast or print media can be understood in terms of its technical process. The technical process is actually the technological aspects of production, distribution and consumption, which contribute to the shaping character and potential of digital media. So, the technical process, which is the infrastructural process, is different when it comes to digital media. The digital media is by nature also a numerical representation, where information is represented in numbers or from another point of view in algorithms or as digital codes. We had also discussed this in the previous lecture. Now, Manovich suggests that numerical representation makes digital information programmable, and this is very, very important, that data in the digital age and media becomes programmable, alterable and therefore subject to algorithmic manipulation. So, when we think about data, it is also something which could be manipulated through algorithms, and it is widely acknowledged that it often happens. Digital media can be tinkered with in a way which is difficult with traditional analog media, or in many ways it is alterable in several ways. It can be compressed and decompressed using algorithms, allowing for large amounts of data to be stored and distributed efficiently, which is why we also talk about digital privacy, primarily to think about how do we protect data privacy in the digital age. It can be manipulated or copied and is transferable between different sources, objects and means of technological delivery. So, these are certain characteristics embedded within digital media itself. Now, we will talk in detail about a characteristic which can be called networked, or a feature which is primarily that digital media is networked in multiple ways, in ways such as the internet, mobile phone or Wi-Fi networks, whereas the broadcast media has a one-way analog infrastructure. It is also networked because it is produced, distributed and consumed through the two-way networked infrastructures. This is borrowing from Castell's idea of the network society. You have conceptually digital media as similar to the telephone then to television broadcasting or cinema screening, because it is more interactive and networked. Now, also understand, learners, that these features go hand in hand. Poster suggests that digital media follows a decentralized network model with many producers and consumers who are in continuous dialogue, unlike the pyramidal broadcast model where there is one-way communication to mass receivers. As I have highlighted, this is a fundamental difference between these forms of media. Now, the decentralization of media production creates many more producers and information sources, which expands the choice that audience has compared to traditional broadcast media. And what we also have is numerous web pages, blogs, forums, digital TV channels, digital media, vastly expanding our choice compared to the broadcast era where information sources were limited, and that is also the diversity of choice which is offered, which becomes a fundamental feature of this new media. you never get bored, and that is also something which is entrenched in the media itself, because digital media caters to your needs continuously 24/7. Now, due to digitalization and the convergence, audiences also have immense choice and the ability to access and select from all forms of media and content across multiple devices and channels. For instance, think about the number of OTT platforms you have and the way that it is possible to have a diverse group of choice available to you. The second feature that we want to talk about is this interactive nature, which Manovich argues is a meaningless term, as the ability to manipulate and customize information is a basic feature of computers. He suggests that most earlier media can also be seen as interactive, since they required the audience to perform some form of work during consumption. However, interactivity is still an important part of digital media, as other scholars have argued, because to a certain extent the term is somewhat watered down. It could be defined in a number of ways, where we think about responsiveness, possibility of responding, as in that you can respond to a media object or a piece of information, and primarily interactivity remains crucial to when we think about digital media, despite Manovich's reservations. This also demonstrates the socio-technical relationship between the media user and the media itself, that there is interactivity where users can provide feedback and that makes interactivity a value added feature of digital media. It is very important that the user interfaces are made as interactive as possible, and it provides business with the means to tailor their products more effectively, so that the needs of the user are met and there is customization. And it has been heavily promoted in web development, particularly in business marketing, which helps the growth of the internet as well as the businesses in reaching out to more and more customers. So, this interactivity is a big part of how customers could also be reached out as part of big businesses. Then I am going to talk about the hypertext and hypermediation, and these also are features where we had a little bit of discussion on the hypertext, which is a form of text composed of nodes or blocks of text, or in media, in the case of hypermedia, which form the content. There are links between these blocks of content, and then there are buttons or tags that enact the link from one mode to another. Information remains continuously available, and as one follows the different links, paths are created which leads to the network of nodes, again highlighting Castle's network society. The fact that the choice of paths is normally up to the reader means that the hypertext by nature is a non-linear form of text, and it begins to blur the distinction between writer and reader. Now, this is an important point, primarily because in traditional text the links are not there. So, you will read it in a linear way. Here, when you are reading a hypertext, it is non-linear, because you could shift from reading one paragraph and then going to the links in that paragraph and reading them. It breaks your flow primarily in the reading of one particular text, which is why it is also generally seen that digital media is viewed critically for its impact on human cognition and attention. But at the same time, it makes it possible to go to other links where you can see that there is continuous information. The distinction between writer and reader is blurred also because let us say you read an article in Times of India, you are able to comment in that article directly, which appears electronically or digitally, that you are able, only digitally, where you are able to insert your comment into what the author may have written. That was not possible in, let us say, an article published only in the press and in a newspaper which did not have a digital version, because if you had to disagree with someone, you will have to send that response to the editor, and it may or may not be published. Now, hypertext combines the traditional text with interactive branching to create a non-linear text, which is very difficult to conceive of within the notion of a traditional printed page. This possibility does not exist in the traditional printed page, primarily because of what I just laid out, that it is not possible to respond in that real time. Now, automated as a characteristic of digital media is something which Manovich talked about, where he could be credited for suggesting that automation is one of the key components of digital media. He proposes that the numerical constitution of digital media and communications means that these products can be easily manipulated through the use of automated templates and algorithms, which is why you see an upsurge in fake news, in fake numbers, in fake photographs, deep fake. Now with the coming in of AI, there are other kinds of manipulations, primarily because automation itself is also a characteristic of digital media. The digital products and media can be automatically modified or even created through software and programs instead of being specifically created or modified by people. For instance, very recently you saw that you could give ChatGPT a command of transforming your own photograph into a Studio Ghibli image, and it could be done. You did not need people to do it, it was automated. So much of what we experience as media objects in this digital culture are created out of databases by machines as opposed to basically human endeavor. Now, in this context, what we should also focus on is how digital media is primarily about these features, which are probably its cons as well as its pros. Primarily because it is interactive, it is automated, it allows users more freedom, more accessibility in using the media. But at the same time, it also leads to these ideas of how sensitive human conditions could be altered and manipulated. For instance, artificial intelligence and digital media being used to create fabricated images of women and then putting their safety at risk. So, one can see that digital media has made inroads into social conditions in ways which was not possible for the traditional old media. Now, the most prominent way in which this automation and the takeover of the machines happens is actually also through increasing personalization of media. Digital media bases much of its commercial value by collecting user data, and then it profiles consumers and then sends us targeted advertisements. So, many of us are familiar with the way how we receive customized ads on Instagram or Facebook or on our Gmails, primarily because of the kind of content that we consume. These platforms like Google, they generate personalized targeted ads. There is a kind of surveillance on our activities, and then we are targeted with those advertisements. Amazon creates profile pages with recommendations based on purchases and browsing history. Many of you will be familiar with this. Yahoo too customizes news content according to user interest and preferences. What social media and networking sites do is they also configure user profiles with friends, updates and activities. You have different levels of customization. There is also a synchronization and syncing of data today, where if you are using a profile in a particular device and you open it in another device, the data gets linked. Now, while it makes our job easier because we do not have to repeat things that we have already done, it also means that our data is no longer private. It is basically digital. It is susceptible to manipulation and also questions of surveillance, etc. It is in that sense embedded within how automation itself is an infrastructural possibility which is offered by digital media, that is a pro as well as a con. Automation also proves to be very essential for our navigation through vast amount of information present on the internet, primarily because we have search engines which generate vast automated databases, and it takes us to information in very real time. We have something called buzz monitoring, which is a more recent tool of internet marketing, in which users automated programs like web robots primarily used to troll the internet looking for topics, trends and text among blogs, discussion forums and social networking in an attempt to read popular culture for marketing purposes. While marketing companies have generally relied on hiring social scientists and business students to do this work of market research. Gradually they have moved on to what would be using web robots to find out information from the internet. So, this is called buzz monitoring, which is an example, an instance of the automation that the digital media offers. Automation is demonstrated through the modeling of behaviors and environments that we have been talking about in digital media. You have video, you have online games, you have artificial life forms, and what happens is that the internet primarily simulates living behavior. This simulation is something which is basically to generate very real kind of information, very real kind of sensation in environments which are digital. For instance, 3D software, first person video games, they create immersive experiences and the illusion of movement for users. So, many of you may be familiar with 3D cinema halls, where when you go to watch the movie, you feel like objects are moving in real time and they are right with you. And this is exactly also what is done in simulated digital environments, where these real time experiences are incorporated into the real. This automation makes it clear how it removes human intentionally from the creative process within digital culture. In many ways, the human intent, the intentionality, my apologies, not intentionally, intentionality, it gets completely erased from the digital culture. So, for instance, today if you lodge a complaint on an app such as Zomato or Amazon, there are fairly great chances of you being directed to an automated bot who talks to you rather than a human. And this indicates that the human is erased from digital culture, rather we have what would be primarily automated kind of processes. So, a large amount of what we experience in digital media is unique, and this uniqueness is also because primarily these unique creations are not composed of human created material, but primarily elements of already existing data which reside in a database and compiled by a machine using an algorithm. So, what you see is the removal of human intentionality, human sensation, human feeling from this automated digital culture. The next feature is data based, and a database is something that many of you will be familiar with. It can be defined as a structured collection of data or a container of information. Now, in a database, what you have is grouped information easily available to you, and you could sort of use the catalog to search for details. Outside of computing, archives, libraries, books, and even elders can to a certain extent be considered forms of database, because they store and organize information so that it could be passed from one generation to another. Now, a database system is essentially composed of three components. You have a storage element, the hardware storage in the case of computers, the means to retrieve and filter data, the software which can be which basically can sort information on the basis of certain parameter, and the means to turn that data into meaningful information, the user who creates meaning. Remember, here it will be useful to use the semiotic approach that the meaning is basically like the press photograph encoded in several sources, and what we do as users is also decode that meaning. Now, the database is also something which is promoted as a flexible kind of feature of digital media. Digital databases, they provide us with an almost infinite set of possibilities for the retrieval, filtering and organization of data. JSTOR, one of the most commonly used academic databases, is primarily a collection of research articles which have been put together for the ease of researchers. Databases consist of lists, tables and other structured units of information that may have little meaning individually, but when put together structurally they become very, very meaningful. Now, Manovich argues that databases, they have become a very dominant cultural form, and most everyday actions involving, eating, thinking, etc., they are engaged with selecting from menus, catalogs or databases. For instance, when you use Zomato to order in, you will go through the catalog of recommended items, chef specials, appetizers, main courses, etc. It is primarily a database which brings this information to you in an easier way. So, what I have been trying to sort of illustrate is these features of what the digital media consist of and their relationships to questions of technology, power and society. So, this is all for this lecture, and I will meet you in the next one.